Deng saved Chinese higher education is an insane thing to state, considering that, you know, it was a little bit of a period of instability if I were to criticize it gently. Being racist towards China. Okay, he's doing a bit. Never mind.
But this Chinese Renaissance didn't happen overnight, nor was its success guaranteed. There was a time when anything was possible. A time when Deng Xiaoping was exiled by his own party to the countryside, more likely to die in obscurity fixing a tractor than to return to Beijing and reshape the nation. The time when a gang of radicals sought to succeed Mao and carry on his perverse and destructive rule when it seemed that Maoist ideological purity was destined to be the ruinous principle at the heart of China's government forever.
Dude.
That is, until this backward vision came crashing down. When in 3 years, 3 massive events combined to shake China to its core and set it on the path to modernity. First, a massive protest at Tiananmen you've likely never heard of. Then, the death of Mao, the father of the revolution. And finally, the unlikely triumph of the exiled Deng Xiaoping over Mao's chosen successor. Yet this story doesn't only explain how China rose to power, it also explains why the country is changing today, why a man like Xi Jinping was destined to come along, reviving Mao's leadership style and abandoning the principles of Deng Xiaoping, which made China a success. This is China, 1976. April 4th, 1976. It's a chilly spring morning in Tiananmen Square, a centuries-old plaza that sits at the core of political power in Beijing, overlooked by the old imperial palace complex and flanked by the headquarters of the communist government. Today is the Qingming Festival, a traditional Chinese celebration of the ancestors. It is, to be blunt, not the kind of thing generally liked by the communists.
I think this is cool. This guy is like, skip this part. Yeah, hey, don't watch this. I think it's cool that there's a guy who's like this far in the tank for Deng. Like, normally I feel like guys that have this kind of position are just like across the board unimaginably anti-China. Am I wrong? Like I feel like I feel like he's got a very liberal intonation, and therefore, yeah, like rabidly anti-communist / CCP, but pro Deng is interesting. It's the libertarian wants a Chinese wife archetype, in my opinion. This guy is liberal cope. I like it.
Party, which has spent the last decade pursuing a so-called cultural revolution, a chaotic nationwide terror campaign meant to root out all vestiges of China's pre-communist culture and tradition, mobilizing radical youths to denounce their elders and the old ways. In turn, the party's old guard was ousted, schools and universities shuttered, all to elevate the power and cult of personality of the country's longtime leader, the now ailing Chairman Mao Zedong. Yet despite this political atmosphere, on this day, as many as 100,000 Chinese citizens occupied the vast square, refusing to leave, ignoring orders booming from nearby loudspeakers. Consider what an inhuman act this was, to bar people from honoring their ancestors because it could conflict with their fealty to the regime's ideology. Learning about those who've come before us can be richly rewarding and humbling.
Luckily, what the fuck? Dude, what? This guy fucking, this is such a strange type of guy. What is going on? I don't know anything about this channel. I like this guy. He's like a Dengist hardliner who is like, no, he was the liberal savior of China. Like what? Because every aspect, look, when I see a new type of guy that has like the Reddit tone, I assume he's not going to say anything positive about China at all.
America isn't totally gripped by a fanatical cult of personality, at least not yet. And so lately, I've been able to learn about my ancestors with...
Like, does he think Xi Jinping is too restrictive in terms of like, reinstating party loyalty and you know, like really pushing the prominent sector leaders into demonstrating party loyalty? Like, he's too illiberal. Like, is that what his take is on? I would love to hear what he has to say about Xi Jinping.
MyHeritage, the #1 family history service and sponsor of this video. With MyHeritage, building your family tree is shockingly easy and actually pretty fun. After signing up, it only took me a few minutes before I uncovered my paternal ancestors going back to my great-great-great-grandparents. When I told my dad, he was blown away. This was family history even he had no idea about. But more than just names, birthdays, and death days, MyHeritage helped me uncover a residence history for my great-great-grandfather, Mao Zedong. Just kidding. Hiram Brain. Maybe the most interesting item there is actually what isn't listed. This gap from 1860 to 1867. Guy from Kentucky.
Yeah, by the way, the "to be rich is glorious" is falsely attributed to Deng Xiaoping. There's not a real, like, from what I understand, I don't think Chinese historians have ever said that was an actual quote by Deng. The quote that I was jokingly referring to and always love posting.
Blank spot on the timeline that matches the American Civil War. But MyHeritage can also restore old pictures of relatives, like these of my late great aunt, bringing those memories back to life. All this is possible thanks to MyHeritage's 32 billion records of family history, from censuses and immigration records to obituaries.
I would love to see him explain why opening the foreign capital made China prosper, but it did not work in any other country that liberalized. No, I think if you're this invested in Deng, then you most likely are not. You still are, to a certain degree, like, not immediately anti-socialist.
And marriage licenses, like this one I stumbled upon. My dad's parents. Luckily, MyHeritage.
Also, both of these pro-Chinese videos are from the same company. What is happening?
And shows you relevant connections, like this one, which will add 40 new people to my family tree with just a click. And now I know my paternal great-grandparents? Hopefully I got that right. Anyways, whether you're keen to learn more about your father's or your mother's ancestors, your cousins, or a long-lost sibling, uncover your past with MyHeritage and get 14 days free with our link below. As for the 100,000 people gathered at Tiananmen in April 1976, they were interested in one ancestor in particular.
Deng said there's no glory in poverty or something like that. And during the interview, and the journalist, it was a CBS journalist that said, to be rich, falsely translated to be rich is glorious. And then Deng didn't deny it, and they just attributed it to him.
Particular, a father of the nation, Zhou Enlai. Instead of disbanding, the crowd continued defiantly laying wreaths in honor of him, the country's former premier, second only to Mao, who died just 3 months prior. Make no mistake, Zhou was neither a Democrat nor a dedicated reformer. At best, he was a moderate among radicals who sought to provide the Chinese people with something other than empty bellies and heads full of propaganda. This made Zhou enemy #1 for the Cultural Revolution's most devoted partisans, a group of 4 high-ranking party members led by Mao's wife, Jiang Qing, known as the Gang of Four. This is why the massive crowd gathered, because whatever his limitations, Zhou was the closest thing the Chinese people had to a symbol of resistance to a decade of radical upheaval. They exchanged poems and slogans that grew increasingly militant in tone, dripping with anger at ruling officials. One read, "I mourn, but the ghosts are screaming. I cry, but the jackals are laughing. Tears are shed in memory of the hero. Eyebrows are raised as I take my sword from my scabbard." For the Communist Party, this was a problem. By the
Joe
next day,
Biden.
protesters still refused to budge and seemed to be growing emboldened, even as militiamen armed with clubs surrounded the square. If someone was going to pull the trigger on a crackdown, it had to be Hua Guofeng, the man who had succeeded the revered Zhou Enlai as premier. Mao was too ill to be present, but he had picked Hua for the job because, unlike Zhou, Hua had no base of power. He could be trusted to follow Mao's line, and on April 5th, he didn't disappoint, as he ordered the militiamen into the square. But today, the crowds were disinclined to be cowed. They fought, a riot broke out, cars were set on fire and overturned. In the end, though, the militia won. In the aftermath, it was clear to party leaders that someone had to take the blame. Acknowledging that the protest had been spontaneous wouldn't do. It meant that the people were, in fact, deeply dissatisfied, which of course they couldn't possibly be. No, someone had to have misled them, lied to them, and seeded a false consciousness. To Mao, Hua, and the Gang of Four, the culprit was obvious: Deng Xiaoping. Deng was the party's vice premier. He'd been
Yeah, clip channels, do not clip my reaction to this. This video is only a couple hours old, okay? Funny enough, Xi's family suffered at Mao's hand during the Cultural Revolution. Excuse me. Xi learned a lot of important lessons, okay? It made him the man he is today. His father was abused physically by the Red Guards. His mom forced to denounce her husband. It was so bad that Xi's older sister unalived herself, unable to live with the horror, shame, and torment heaped on her for being the child of a capitalist inroader. Xi himself was banished to the countryside for re-education, which involved hard labor, reciting Mao Zedong thoughts and self-criticisms of his capitalist tendencies. Yeah. I don't know if you mean what you say, but you should be careful joking about some of these things. Why? No, I'm not going to be careful joking about these things. If Deng Xiaoping, who brought his father back from obscurity and exonerated Xi's family, funny how Xi adores Mao Zedong, the destroyer of his family, who said that Stockholm Syndrome is not real. I love that this person also recognizes, like, unironically, dude, listen. Like, oh, it must be because he was brainwashed is a very weird approach. Okay? It's got to be a real weird approach to just be like, yeah, he probably got brainwashed, so the re-education worked when he recited Mao Zedong thought. That's probably what happened. She also lived in the U.S. for a time, Ohio. That's right. She was able to learn how the countryside operates in both the capitalist hellhole of America KKK and also on the Chinese countryside. Yes, he did. He has a special connection to Iowa, not Ohio, by the way. It was actually Iowa. This chatter is correct. This commentator is correct. He's spinning some careful, opportunistic lies. He probably knows, but once you're up on the top, all you can see are the myriad ways to fall down. So if dressing his rhetoric in the colors of his oppressors and stacking your admin with incompetent goons like he did keeps you up top, you'll do it for fear of the alternative. You can never not adore Mao in China. No one wants to make the Khrushchev mistake. This just shows how communists and cults screw with you and howl a nation. Yeah, they're so fucking screwed.
Zhou's second in command, and the two were personally and politically close. Deng had already been disgraced and cast out once before at the beginning of the Cultural Revolution, exiled to the countryside to repair tractors in obscurity. But after 6 years, Mao had begun to question the wisdom of this radicalism.
You were joking about Xi's family suffering, but it was definitely very serious. Okay. Yes, and he also did get sent to the countryside. And he learned from he learned from that experience and it made him the statesman that he is.
As he sought a counterweight to Jiang and her radical gang, it was Zhou who convinced him to invite
Bro is offended for Xi. I know.
Deng back. The two of them had always shared a reformist streak. Yet, even with Deng's return in 1973, the Cultural Revolution had by no means come to a stop. As one member of the Gang of Four put it in a 1975 article in China's leading communist journal,
"On no account should we relax our vigilance just because we have won a great victory in the great proletarian cultural revolution. Today there are still many fortified villages held by the bourgeoisie. When one is destroyed, another will spring up. And even if all have been destroyed except one, it will not vanish of itself if the iron broom of the dictatorship of the proletariat does not reach it."
In turn, they took this 1976 Tiananmen protest as proof of their beliefs. Even with Zhou dead, more enemies remained. So they zeroed in on Zhou's living avatar, the inheritor of his politics. But powerful as the gang was, they couldn't do anything to Deng Xiaoping. The order had to come from Mao. Like the gang, Zhou's successor Hua Guofeng saw Deng Xiaoping as simply another rival. Yet he too remained powerless as long as Mao lived. Hua had spent most of his career as a party secretary in a small town notable only for having been Mao's birthplace. As a result, he had no base of power independent of Mao, and that was why Mao had elevated him to second in command. His loyalty was guaranteed. Indeed, this was the defining feature of Mao's China, only heightened over the course of the Cultural Revolution: loyalty to the communist line, formulated by Mao himself, and nothing else, which is why Mao too arrived at the same conclusion about Deng Xiaoping. After this display, he could pose a threat. So despite his competency, not to mention innocence, Deng lost everything once again. He was stripped of all titles and responsibilities, leaving him with nothing but his party membership, and was forced into house arrest. However, the time of Mao calling the shots was not to last. On September 9, 1976, he was struck by a fourth heart attack in months. Unlike the others, this one he did not survive. Chairman Mao Zedong, father of the Chinese Revolution and master of the nation for more than 25 years, was dead. A mere 8 months since the Tiananmen incident, China was in stormy seas, and now without a helmsman. Succession was the immediate concern, and thanks to the chaos of Mao's final years, that question had many answers. Hua Guofeng's path was the clearest, his vision the least ambitious.
China is winning so hard, libs are trying to paint Xi as a victim of communism who infiltrated the party despite his trauma and brought profit. Yeah, I mean, I'll take it. Whatever the fuck people, whatever floats their boat. Yeah. Xi, the true spiritual successor of Deng, is actually revolutionizing or liberalizing the Chinese economy. If that's what you want to believe, then great, sure, okay. Yeah, I agree. Let's not go to war with China, please. Thank you.
Picked by Mao as his vice chairman in the aftermath of the Tiananmen incident, Hua immediately rose to acting chairman upon Mao's death. However, he was not without challengers. The day after Mao's funeral, members of the Gang of Four demanded that Mao's papers be placed in the custody of his nephew, the group's ally, an obvious attempt to find or forge proof of Mao's will that his wife Jiang Qing should inherit his power. But Hua fended off the attempt and remained confident that as long as Chiang sought to carve out power from within the system, he was secure. Not only was he acting chairman, the gang was hardly popular with the rest of the communist elite, whom they'd hounded and intimidated during the Cultural Revolution. Yet Chiang and the gang had power of their own. Radical newspapers and radio stations across the country ready to mobilize the gang's fanatical youth militia. So on October 4th, when one of the gang's hardline papers published an editorial calling for just that, Hua's sense of security vanished. Within 2 days, he concocted a plan and called an impromptu session of the Politburo Standing Committee. Fearing that the gang might smell a plot, he set an agenda they couldn't resist: publication of the final volume of Mao's collected works, the final say in the chairman's legacy. It was so enticing that 3 of the 4 attended, everyone but Jiang Qing. Around 8 p.m. on October 6th, they began to arrive at the government headquarters at Zhongnanhai, near Tiananmen, and one by one, as they entered, they were seized upon by guards and hauled before Hua Guofeng. In the hall of Huajin, he rose and pronounced,
"You have committed anti-party and anti-socialist crimes. The party center is placing you in confinement for investigation."
At the same time, Hua sent a detachment to Jiang Qing's home. She didn't put up a fight. However potent the gang had proved during the Cultural Revolution, however much support they'd received from their patron Mao, their political instincts were, well, pretty terrible. It was over for them, and in turn the radical Maoism they represented, which had prized ideological purity alone and left over 1 million Chinese bodies in its wake, without accounting for the costs of the unimaginable poverty it willfully perpetuated. And the gang's fall was a glimmer of hope for China, a promise that maybe now the country could move forward, not stuck in perpetual revolution, but toward a better future. To pull that off, though, Hua needed help from someone with sharp political instincts, deep support in the party, and a vision for the future. He needed Deng Xiaoping. Yet these qualities made Deng a threat to Hua as well as an asset. Before he could recall Deng, Hua needed to solidify his position. Because his power came from Mao, he undertook a sort of public relations campaign to brand himself the defender of Mao's legacy, culminating in a February 1977 editorial which would soon become known as the Two Whatevers. In it, Hua declared,
"We will resolutely uphold whatever policy decisions Chairman Mao made and unswervingly follow whatever instructions Chairman Mao gave."
That included affirming the counter-revolutionary nature of the Tiananmen incident. But communist politics can be funny, with how easy it is to do one thing and say another, to wrap a massive policy change in the language of fealty to the party line and the immutable principles of the archaic 19th century Marxist science, and that's exactly what Hua intended, as he immediately sought to undo Mao's decision to exile Deng. At first, Hua demanded that Deng endorse the Two Whatevers, but Deng rightly judged that Hua's situation was impossible. He had to defend Mao, yet also needed to alter the ruinous path Mao had set China on. He condemned Tiananmen, even as he begged its supposed mastermind for help. So Deng refused to endorse the Two Whatevers, calling Hua's bluff. And a bluff it proved to be. In June of 1977, not much more than a year after he'd been cast out, Deng Xiaoping was restored to all his old positions. A long list of titles at the highest levels of party, state, and military. Not bad for a man who days earlier had remained in exile. But Deng disdained the glamour and titles. Desiring rather, in his own words, to accomplish something, he requested responsibility for science and education policy.
Bro really is a Dengist, dude. He's like a liberal. He's like a neo-lib Dengist.
Here, Deng had an opportunity to differentiate himself from Mao, and by extension Hua, by cultivating talent instead of obsessing over ideological purity. In turn, he reopened China's long-shuttered universities and shockingly reintroduced the Gaokao, China's standardized exams. For the first time since the communists took power, school admissions would be based on merit, without consideration of class background. He went further, matter-of-factly debunking a key Mao policy of sending students to work in the countryside, saying,
"Facts have shown that after a couple of years of labor, the students have forgotten half of what they learned at school. This is a waste of time."
This was Deng's vision for China. It would be results, not intention. Practice, not ideology. Facts, not imagination, that
He was a based anti-DEI. I'm kidding. He was not anti-DEI. China has seemingly had affirmative action around the time when America became a state.
Determined policy. When officials returned from studying industrial practices in
Europe,
Deng
is actually true. China had affirmative action before, basically around the same time America became a state. China had affirmative action.
Summarized his view, saying,
"The basic point is this. We must acknowledge that we are backward, that many of our ways of doing things are inappropriate, and that we need to change."
Yet Deng couldn't simply disown Mao and all he stood for, which was, in practice, mostly the opposite of those things. To survive in the party, he had to reconcile his vision with Mao Zedong thought, no matter how contorted the reconciliation. But where Mao was a talent...
Also, like, the notion that, like, Chinese higher education was not up to snuff under Mao is, and that like Deng saved Chinese higher education is an insane thing to state, considering that, you know, it was a little bit of a period of instability, if I were to if I were to criticize it gently. He did not say that. No, he said that Deng reopened the higher institutes of learning and that they weren't around before Deng. You know, considering that there was a fucking genocide before they were a colonial, I mean, before they were a colonial subject, and also a civil war against the nationalist factions, while simultaneously also being, once again, dominated by and being genocided by the Japanese. I feel like that's a hard time to. It's a hard time to maintain higher education.
Theorist who could refashion reality with his revolutionary worldviews, Deng was a practitioner without an ideology that fit Maoist tradition. Luckily, many of China's intellectuals saw Deng as their hero, the great education crusader. In turn, a group of academics published an article attempting to solve Deng's dilemma titled, "Practice is the sole criterion for judging truth." It was nothing short of revolutionary. The article argued that Marxism is not a literal scripture, but a body of ideas which require interpretation based on the context of their application. This was exactly what Deng needed. Armed with this new theory, Deng left the party's stronghold of Beijing and took to China's northeastern provinces, holding meetings with old allies and drumming up support for this new notion of practice over Hua's two whatevers. To Deng's delight, support was easy to find. Discontent, even rage, over Mao's abuse of party comrades was widespread among provincial officials, and they resented Hua's unwillingness to own Mao's or his own failures, particularly regarding Tiananmen. They were hungry for a break with the past. Deng was ready to make his play. By the time he returned to Beijing in November of 1978, the 11th Party Work Conference was already underway. It began, as all the worst corporate conferences do, with breakout sessions and small group discussions. These composed of provincial officials, divided by region. Bad news for Hua, because with Mao gone and discussions taking place amongst regional comrades, delegates felt freer to speak their mind than they had in decades. In turn, their conversations rapidly diverged from the official agenda and into grievance airing about the errors of Maoism and the need for reform. Hua sought to tame the flames. In speeches to the assembly, he disowned the excesses of the Cultural Revolution and endorsed opening up to foreign investment and modernization, concessions which surely sent the embalmed Mao spinning in his glass display case. Yet it wasn't enough. Hua continued to hold to the two whatevers and maintained that Tiananmen had been counter-revolutionary, a deep affront to many who identified with the protesters. Sensing Hua's conciliatory tone, members of the Beijing Party Committee spied an opportunity to defy the chairman directly. On November 13th, they published an announcement, unilaterally declaring Tiananmen
entirely a revolutionary action
and promising rehabilitation for all those persecuted. 5 days later, Hua pivoted and posed for press photos with a newly published book he'd personally titled, a collection of poems commemorating the Tiananmen demonstration. He was adapting. A week later, back at the conference, Hua gave another speech explaining that he was willing to serve the party and accept the prevailing views, even if they contradicted his own stated positions. It was too late. Hua had allowed himself to be defied by his subordinates. The speech was effectively a concession. Soon, delegates began issuing statements, officially declaring their allegiance to Deng's philosophy of practice over the two whatevers. Without any formal change of power or promotion, it was clear to all present that Deng's coup was complete. No longer fighting an uphill battle, Deng was confident and believed this was the time to take his vision one step further, beyond economic reform and into politics. Thus, in his closing speech of the conference, he declared,
"Centralism can be correct only when there is a full measure of democracy. At present, we must lay particular stress on democracy because for quite some time, there was too little democracy. The masses should be encouraged to offer criticisms. The thing to be feared most is silence."
For the party elite, this was a scandalous notion. For those on the outside, it couldn't have been more obvious. In fact, over the past couple months, on an avenue not far from Tiananmen Square, some posters had already begun to appear, criticizing Mao's legacy and the state of Chinese politics. By December 5th, after Hua's informal ousting, new posters began specifically calling for democracy as a crucial component of China's modernization. This was a direct invitation to Deng, the self-professed modernizer and democracy advocate, to put his money where his mouth was. 3 months later, Deng issued his response. On March 30th, 1979, he gave a speech outlining his 4 cardinal principles: socialism, the dictatorship of the proletariat, the leadership of the Communist Party, and Marxism-Leninism and Mao Zedong thought. In Deng's words, these were items beyond criticism. All that talk of democracy, Deng had meant democracy only intra-party, or within the party. Whatever Deng's boldness, it was now clear. His goal was to save totalitarianism, not transform it into something else. Democracy to him was just a useful tool to make sure the ruling party was running smoothly, not destroying itself under a misguided dictator like Mao. And in that respect, Deng succeeded. Within the party, he cultivated a less violent, more regularized set of procedures for policymaking and resolving disagreements among leadership, emphasizing democracy within the party, which resulted in rewards for—
You don't understand, when Deng did it, it was for good reason. As opposed to when Mao did it and it was for bad reason. I mean, this is the problem, I think, with like assuming that like one singular individual is capable of changing the course, changing the trajectory of this country.
For competence. Crucially, though, the party's results-oriented culture, which Deng fostered, carried into policy, reshaping the nation for the better. No longer in a Maoist straitjacket, local officials were allowed to—
Is this what you meant when you said you knew what best was entertaining? Because folks are leaving, I'm into it, but you get what I mean? I suggested Dick Wolf talking about Trump. Okay, take a day off. Yes.
Experiment, even with—
Sometimes it's what I consider to be entertaining.
Markets and private enterprise, which quickly showed their utility. Although China's most explosive period of growth would occur after his time in power, Deng's vision of experimentation, adaptation, and practice over ideology was the foundation for China's rapid transformation from one of the absolute poorest nations on Earth to the world's second largest economy. Yet Deng's reforms had their limits. He adhered fiercely to the 4 cardinal principles at Tiananmen in 1989 to protest the ruling order Deng had preserved. He rescued China's totalitarian regime from the dogmatism of its architect by making it more— Deng had preserved. He rescued China's totalitarian regime from the dogmatism of its architect by making it more responsible, legally signal preferences or incentives, and remain committed to public of its architect by making it more responsible, legally signal preferences or incentives, and remain committed to public goods. And today, power has consolidated and incentives for competition to public goods. And today, power has consolidated and incentives for competition.
Oh my! It's because the party has not abided by the and
Power has consolidated and incentives for competition.
Oh my! It's because the party has not abided by the and not oh my! It's because the party has not abided by the and not institute like true democracy by the and not institute like true democracy, which Deng didn't do as well. He's such not institute like true democracy, which Deng didn't do as well. He's so fucking pro Deng that he like, as like the anti-China videos that I have seen, where like anti-China videos normally will not go in, where like anti-China videos normally will not go this far into how Deng was great. Deng was great. They like he even talks about Tiananmen Square as like a brief moment. And then also that China is actually also on the verge of collapse, and its economic growth is stunted because it hasn't followed through. It hasn't followed through on enough liberalization.
Xi Jinping, China's leader, secured himself a third straight term as party chief, unprecedented since Mao's death, and followed it up with a third straight term as party chief, unprecedented since Mao's death, and followed it up with a mandatory public education campaign in Xi Jinping thought. Under him, loyalty rules once more, as his supporters have displaced competent but neutral figures across the ranks of top party leadership. This is not a prediction that Xi's China is about to collapse, that a crisis is—
Shut up. I fucking love China, but your defense of Mao is just disgusting. This is just the guy who caused the Great Famine in China into the Cultural Revolution that destroys so much Chinese history and created generational trauma in the population. No, I see founding fathers in the exact same vein. They're slavers, but they also engaged in a just war against the British Empire. That's simply it. Like, that's it. It's also, does it not even remotely shock you or confuse you at all, the admiration that even modern Chinese society has towards Mao? Like, there are allowed criticisms of Mao, Cultural Revolution being one of them, as you also mentioned. Your moral compass flexibility is hard to read? No, it's not. I would say it's fairly consistent and accurate. I've long maintained that same position about America's founding fathers as well. I've said similar things about Stalin in terms of his actions during World War II. In terms of his actions during World War II. Like, every leader, regardless of their ideological predisposition, will do some of it is mismanagement, like emancipatory violence. Others are violence. Others are violence who don't deserve it. The reason why China is the way it is right now are violence who don't deserve it. The reason why China is the way it is right now, leaders, including the reason why China is the way it is right now, leaders, including Deng and his contributions alongside right now, leaders, including Deng and his contributions alongside Xi, like, and his contributions alongside Xi, like, just to justify my messaging. Just to justify my messaging. I think, like, sure, class dynamic, glee. I think, like, sure, class dynamic, glee, godly, consequential, and also violent. Like, sure, class dynamic, glee, godly, consequential, and also violent. China would be what it is today. China without the Cultural Revolution would be like India today. France had its own Cultural Revolution to get liberalism, and definitely aspects of the Cultural Revolution that went way too far. The revolution would be like India today. France had its own Cultural Revolution to get liberalism, and definitely aspects of the Cultural Revolution that went way too far.